Jamal had always dreamed big, even when his life seemed small. Growing up on a modest farm in a rural area, he understood the value of hard work from a young age. Every day, he woke up before the sun and worked tirelessly alongside his parents, tending to the crops and livestock. There was no time for rest, but it didn't bother him. In fact, it shaped him. Jamal knew the sweat and effort it took to build something from nothing. But while he loved his life on the farm, Jamal had aspirations beyond the fields. He often looked up at the sky, seeing airplanes soaring high above, wishing he could touch the clouds, and imagining what it would be like to fly. The thought of owning a private jet had seemed impossible, even laughable, for someone like him, a black farmer with no connections to the rich and powerful world of luxury. It was a dream he kept to himself, knowing that people like him didn't typically have such opportunities. However, that didn't stop him from working relentlessly toward it. Years passed, and Jamal's farm grew. He expanded his land, improved his crops, and built a solid reputation within his community. His hard work paid off in ways he never expected. Slowly, he began to accumulate wealth, not through shortcuts or luck, but by doing things the right way. He invested his earnings wisely, always thinking ahead. While his friends and family celebrated small victories, Jamal kept his eye on a much bigger prize. He dreamed of success beyond the farm, of having the freedom to travel, to reach new heights, and to explore the world that had always seemed so distant. One evening, as Jamal sat on his porch, watching the sun set over the horizon, he found himself thinking about that far-off dream again. A jet. The very thought made him smile, but also feel a strange sense of disbelief. Could he really do it? Could he, a farmer, buy a jet? For months, he researched everything about private jets. He read articles, watched videos, and even spoke to a few people in the industry who were willing to entertain the thought of someone like him being able to afford such a luxury. He was astounded by the costs, the maintenance, the lifestyle that came with owning a jet. It was more than just buying an aircraft. It was a way of life. But Jamal had always known that big dreams came with big challenges. If anyone could overcome those challenges, it would be him. Jamal's determination grew. He started cutting down on unnecessary expenses and putting aside every extra penny he could. He was no longer just a farmer. He was an entrepreneur, a businessman with a vision. He expanded his farm's operations, diversified into organic produce, and even launched a small online store selling his farm's products. Every decision he made was calculated, with his ultimate goal always in mind: owning that jet. He couldn't shake the thought of flying above the clouds, free from the weight of the world, seeing everything from a higher perspective. Then one day, after years of hard work, a breakthrough came. Jamal had made it. He had the money, the success, and the opportunity. The numbers lined up. The dream no longer seemed impossible, and for the first time in his life, he thought that maybe, just maybe, he could actually buy that jet. With his heart racing, he reached for the phone and made the call. He had already done his research, and he knew exactly which model he wanted. He had the funds, the desire, and the resolve. This was the moment he had been waiting for. This was his dream coming true. As he hung up the phone, a smile spread across his face. He had done it. The black farmer from humble beginnings, who once looked up at the sky in awe, was now on the verge of purchasing a private jet. He knew this wasn't just a purchase. It was a symbol of everything he had worked for. It was proof that dreams, no matter how big, could come true with enough perseverance and belief. But what Jamal didn't know was that his dream was about to be challenged in ways he never expected. Little did he know that the journey ahead would be more complicated than he could have ever imagined. The day Jamal had long dreamed of finally arrived. With a sense of excitement and nervous anticipation, he drove to the luxury jet dealership. The sleek glass building gleamed under the morning sun, standing in stark contrast to the rustic farmlands Jamal had known his entire life. As he stepped out of his truck, his heart raced. He could hardly believe that today, the dream that had once seemed unreachable would soon be a reality. Jamal had dressed carefully for the occasion. He wasn't one to put on airs, but he knew this moment was important. He wore his best shirt, ironed and crisp, though his boots were a reminder of his farm life. As he walked toward the entrance, he took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. He had worked for years to get to this point. He deserved this. Inside, the dealership was pristine, filled with luxurious jets that shimmered under the bright lights. The salespeople were impeccably dressed, moving with an air of superiority. Jamal took a moment to absorb the grandeur, feeling both awe and a slight sense of discomfort. He had always felt out of place in high-end environments like this, but today, he wasn't going to let anything stop him from achieving his dream. As he approached the counter, a young, sharp-dressed salesman looked up from his desk. His smile was professional, but Jamal could sense something off in the way the man studied him. Perhaps it was the way his eyes lingered for a moment too long on Jamal's worn boots, or the slight narrowing of his gaze when Jamal spoke. "I'm interested in purchasing a jet," Jamal said, his voice steady but filled with quiet excitement. "I've been doing some research, and I know exactly what I want." The salesman's smile faltered for a second, then returned, but this time it seemed a little more forced. "Of course, sir. We have many models to choose from. If you follow me, I can show you some options." Jamal followed the man, trying to ignore the coldness in his voice. As they walked past rows of shining aircraft, Jamal couldn't help but admire them. These jets represented everything he had worked so hard for. He was close, so close, to making his dream a reality. But the salesman's attitude began to shift as they reached the first jet. The smile faded, and there was a distinct coldness in his voice. "This one's a bit out of your league," the salesman remarked, without any trace of warmth. "Perhaps you'd be better off looking at something a little more affordable." Jamal's heart sank. He had anticipated the price would be high, but he had done his research. He knew he could afford this. He wasn't here to be dismissed or judged, especially not by someone who had no idea what he had endured to get to this point. "I can afford it," Jamal said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I've worked hard for everything I've earned." The salesman raised an eyebrow, his gaze cold and skeptical. We'll see," he replied, almost dismissively. "I'm sure you could get some kind of loan or something. This is a big investment, you know." Jamal's pulse quickened, and a flush of anger crept up his neck. He had spent years building this farm, saving every penny he could, working harder than most people could imagine. And here this man was, implying that he couldn't afford what was rightfully his. He had never felt more humiliated. The assumption that someone like him, someone who didn't fit the mold of the rich, powerful jet owner, couldn't belong in this world hit him like a punch in the gut. As the salesman continued to show him other jets, each more out of reach than the last, Jamal felt his frustration grow. He tried to stay calm, but it was becoming impossible. The salesman's casual racism was seeping through every word. Jamal was no longer just a customer. He was a black man who didn't belong in this space, and it was becoming painfully obvious. Jamal's stomach churned as he realized that this experience, this dream, was becoming a nightmare. The more the salesman spoke, the more he felt the weight of his prejudice. He had worked so hard to get here, only to be treated like an outsider, as though his skin color was a barrier to his dreams. Finally, as they reached the last jet on display, the salesman turned to him with a thin smile. "Well, if you want to keep looking, I can show you some other options. But I'd suggest you think about whether you really want to invest in something like this." Jamal felt his face flush with anger and humiliation. He had come so far, only to be dismissed and belittled. This was supposed to be the culmination of years of effort and sacrifice, but now it felt like it was slipping out of his grasp. But as Jamal stood there, his mind raced. He wasn't going to let this man define his worth. He had worked too hard, fought too long, and come too far to let anyone, especially a stranger who knew nothing about his life, take away his dreams. The fight wasn't over. Not yet. Jamal stood there, feeling humiliated and powerless, his dream of owning a jet slipping further out of reach, with every dismissive word the salesman uttered. His heart pounded in his chest, the unfairness of the situation overwhelming him. He had never been treated this way, not even in the toughest moments on the farm. But here, in this high-end luxury showroom, he was being looked at like he didn't belong. The air was thick with a mix of anger and frustration, but Jamal wasn't one to give up easily. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to let anyone crush his dream. As the salesman continued to talk, his voice condescending and filled with doubt, Jamal's patience started to wear thin. He could feel the sting of every word, the implication that because he was black, because he came from humble beginnings, he wasn't worthy of owning something as lavish as a private jet. Jamal's hands clenched into fists at his sides, but he refused to let the anger consume him. He had spent his life fighting for what he wanted, and this moment wouldn't be any different. He wasn't about to let the narrow-mindedness of one man define who he was or what he could achieve. Just as Jamal was about to turn and walk out, disheartened by the treatment he had received, something unexpected happened. A voice from behind him interrupted the uncomfortable silence, cutting through the tension like a knife. "Excuse me, sir. Can I help you?" Jamal turned around to see an older man, perhaps in his late 50s, standing just a few feet away. He was impeccably dressed, wearing a tailored suit and a confident, yet approachable smile. His presence was calm and grounded, in stark contrast to the arrogance of the salesman. The man's eyes held a quiet understanding, as if he had seen too many situations like this, and knew exactly what was going on. He wasn't just a rich customer. He was someone who recognized when something wasn't right. Jamal, still feeling the weight of the moment, hesitated for a moment before speaking. I was just looking to buy a jet. But I'm not sure if I'm even welcome here," he said, the words coming out more bitter than he had intended. "It's clear I'm not the type of person they want to sell to." The older man raised an eyebrow, taking in Jamal's words. Without hesitation, he walked over to the salesman, who was still standing nearby, acting as if Jamal wasn't even there. "Is there a problem here?" the older man asked, his voice low but commanding. The salesman, caught off guard, stammered for a moment before answering. No problem at all, sir. We're just showing this gentleman the options he's interested in." The older man's gaze turned cold as he looked the salesman in the eye. "I'm not asking you what you think. I'm asking him," he said, turning to Jamal. "Is everything okay? Are you being treated fairly?" Jamal blinked in surprise, taken aback by the man's directness. He nodded slowly, though he wasn't sure how to explain the feeling of being dismissed, of being made to feel less than. I've been trying to buy a jet, but it feels like they don't believe I can afford it, like I don't belong here." The older man nodded knowingly, his expression softening. "I see. Well, I'm sorry you've been made to feel this way. You've come here to make an important purchase, and you deserve to be treated with respect, just like anyone else. Let me help you." Jamal was stunned. Here was a stranger who understood exactly what he was going through, a man who didn't judge him based on his appearance or where he came from. The kindness in his eyes made Jamal feel something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Maybe not everyone in this world saw him through the lens of his race or background. Maybe there were still people who believed in treating others with fairness and dignity. The older man smiled warmly at Jamal. "I'll make sure you get the service you deserve. I have connections in this business, and I know the right people who can help you. Don't let one person's ignorance stop you from reaching your goals." Jamal could hardly believe what he was hearing. This man didn't just offer words of encouragement, he offered a tangible solution. He wasn't just offering to stand up for Jamal in this moment, but he was offering to connect him with people who could help him realize his dream. Jamal felt a surge of gratitude and a renewed sense of purpose. "Thank you," Jamal said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what to say." The older man patted him on the back. "No need to thank me. Everyone deserves the chance to dream big, no matter who they are or where they come from. Now let's get you the jet you deserve. With that, Jamal felt a weight lift off his shoulders. For the first time that day, he felt like he wasn't alone in his journey. The unexpected support from this stranger had changed everything. It wasn't just about the jet anymore. It was about standing tall in the face of adversity, about knowing that there were still good people in the world who would fight for what's right. And with that, Jamal's dreams seemed more possible than ever. The days that followed were filled with both anticipation and excitement. With the older man's support, Jamal's journey took a dramatic turn. The businessman, who had offered to help, had connections within the private jet industry that Jamal never could have imagined. He introduced Jamal to a network of professionals who didn't see his humble beginnings or the color of his skin. They only saw his determination and success. With their help, Jamal was able to navigate through the maze of jet purchasing, and the process, which had initially seemed overwhelming and filled with obstacles, suddenly became much clearer. Jamal spent the next few weeks meeting with brokers, checking out various models, and learning more about the world he was about to enter. He realized how much he still had to learn about the maintenance and upkeep of a private jet. But the more he learned, the more he saw the bigger picture. This jet wasn't just a luxury. It represented his success, his hard work, and the rewards that came with years of dedication. It was proof that someone like him, someone who came from nothing, could rise above and achieve great things. As Jamal continued to make his way through the process, something remarkable happened. The people who had previously doubted him, those who had turned a blind eye to his ambition, began to take notice. They watched as he, a man they once looked down upon, was now on the brink of making a purchase that many would only dream of. Jamal wasn't just buying a jet. He was challenging the status quo, proving that dreams were for everyone, no matter their background or circumstances. Finally, the day arrived. Jamal stood in front of the sleek, luxurious jet he had chosen, the culmination of years of hard work, perseverance, and unwavering belief in himself. As he walked toward the aircraft, his heart raced with pride. This wasn't just a symbol of his success. It was a symbol of every late night, every early morning, every sacrifice he had made to get to this point. The jet gleamed in the sunlight, its smooth lines reflecting the bright sky above. Jamal's hands trembled slightly as he touched the polished surface, but his smile was wide, genuine, and filled with pride. The older man, who had supported him from the very beginning, stood beside him with a proud look on his face. "I knew you had it in you," he said, clapping Jamal on the back. "This is just the beginning. You've proven that with the right mindset and determination, there's nothing you can't achieve." Jamal nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "I never thought I'd be here. This has always seemed like a dream, something out of reach. But now, it's real." The businessman smiled, his eyes shining with admiration. "You earned it, Jamal. You showed the world that it's not where you come from, but where you're willing to go that matters." As Jamal stood there, looking up at the jet that now belonged to him, he realized that this moment wasn't just about the luxury or the wealth. It was about the journey he had taken to get here. It was about the barriers he had broken, the challenges he had overcome, and the belief that no dream was too big. This jet wasn't just a tool for travel. It was a testament to his resilience, his strength, and his refusal to let anyone's doubt define his future. In the days that followed, Jamal used his new jet not only for personal travel, but also to further his business ventures. He expanded his farm's operations, visited international markets, and connected with other entrepreneurs who shared his vision. The jet became a symbol of his new beginning, a new chapter in his life where the sky was no longer the limit. It was just the beginning. Jamal's stories spread far and wide, inspiring countless others who, like him, had been told that their dreams were impossible. His journey became a beacon of hope, a reminder that with hard work, determination, and the right support, anything was possible. Jamal was no longer just a farmer. He was an entrepreneur, a visionary, and a symbol of what could be achieved when you refuse to let obstacles define your path. As he looked out of the window of his jet during his first flight, Jamal couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude wash over him. He was living proof that dreams, no matter how big or small, were worth pursuing. And as he soared above the clouds, he knew that his story had just begun. The triumph wasn't just in owning the jet. It was in everything he had learned along the way, the people he had met, and the life he had built from the ground up. This was just the beginning of Jamal's new life, a life that no longer knew limits, where the sky was truly the only boundary. And with that, he knew that his journey was far from over. He was ready for whatever came next.